let's talk about the Maggie's thing.
Yeah.
Because that's, that propelled you into a whole different realm.
Dude, I literally went from a basement with 40 lights to 50 acres of outdoor. It wasn't all planted, but he had these massive farms and he was all organic and he was working directly with Subcool and getting bomb ass genetics, and we were breeding in-house, and that was all just brand new to me. It was all living a dream though, because I wanted to do it so bad. The funny thing is,
we're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, from OGs, masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the dead is green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5E and always available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. Today we are in studio with our good buddy, Matt Bickle. Matt is a seasoned cannabis cultivator, consultant, and founder of Bickle Consulting. And today we have a bunch of questions for him, going back to how he got started through where he's at today. So welcome to the studio, Matt Bickle.
thank you so much.
Hell yeah. We've been friends for a long time, dude.
20 years?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy because I think about how the Denver scene started and how we all there for a long time. There was a bunch of bars here that were Grateful Dead themed. We had Sancho's and Quixotes and Dulcineas, and a lot of us met at these bars and stuff. And you were actually one of the door guys. I mean, you were essentially, when I first met you, you were the door. Yeah. So, interesting to see how far you've come, especially because, we were all a bunch of kids back then. You were just kind of a bunch of ragtag hustlers, we all, did our own things. So, let's dive into that story. First off, tell me a little bit, just, what was when you first came to Denver, what happened? How did you get here? What brought you to Denver?
So I was going to school in Texas, playing football at Baylor University, and I had a love affair with cannabis my whole life, and had been chasing around good cannabis my whole life, and had started in college going to Amsterdam and studying and learning about the plant, and started growing it very poorly, but just taken a test at it.
This is the 90s?
Yeah. Okay. 98, 99.
Okay. Good time to be there.
Yeah, totally. It was awesome. And it was there was a guy named John that owned a place called the Gray
Area. Yeah, I met John. I know John.
And he had a grow, and he took me to his big, huge warehouse and showed me everything. And it was the first time I even got a visualization besides a couple plants at the Cannabis College. I don't know if you remember, they had them always plants out in the room. And so I got to go see a big, huge grow. My mind was blown. And it's something I knew I wanted to do for sure. And I didn't know how or if it was ever going to be legal, but it was something I got so passionate about. I always joked that I had centerfolds of High Times on my walls in college instead of girls. I just always had a love affair with the plant. And when I had a chance I graduated from college and I moved home, and I was home for 4 days, and I had just gone and seen Widespread Panic for New Year's. I graduated in December from Baylor, and on December 20th, and went straight to Atlanta and saw Widespread Panic for 3 nights. And it was my 4th and 5th and 6th shows. I saw them twice in Texas, and then those 3 times. And I just knew that I wanted to go be a part of this counterculture thing that was tugging at me so hard. And I moved home, and I was home for exactly 4 days. I'm from Missouri, and I was home for exactly 4 days. And on the 4th day, I was working for my dad, and I was driving home from work. And I just realized this can't be my life. And I did a U-turn in the middle of the highway and went back to the U-Haul place where I dropped it off 4 days ago, picked it back up, loaded it up, and drove to Denver that night. Had no friends here.
You didn't know anybody?
Nope. I knew there was a medical weed program, and I knew that I could get a card here and grow 6 plants here.
Yeah.
And I moved to Denver with no friends, no job, no nothing. And a buddy of mine had come out like 48 hours before me to go to culinary school, and we just figured it out. We just freestyled it. And I was going to take a job at, I had gotten offered a job as a door guy at a strip club. And I was like, oh man, like this is going to be my life. And on the way to the strip club, I stopped at Sancho's and asked if I could get a job. And they said, yeah. They're like, you can work the door here. And then my whole trajectory of my life changed like, tenfold.
It's pretty amazing because I can, again, we have a bunch of friends, myself, you, Gamut. There's a lot of people, IPA Mike. There's a lot of us who really, it's funny because I hear a lot of people use the term legacy. And, I had Scott Reach on the show and I was like, how do you refer to people who were like pre-legacy? And we were like pioneer.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of people who, came out of that pioneer group that really met in that bar and interacted in that bar and kind of, it's one thing I've always loved about you is, your love of music and cannabis has always been intertwined with each other. And so, of course, being in a Grateful Dead bar and interacting with like a lot of other people who grow weed, it's definitely, where was your first place? Like, what was did you get a place in town? Did you have a place in the mountains? Like, what was your
first in town? So, and I got to jump into this real fast before we move on. I remember telling my friends whenever I got the job there, I was like, I seem to have met all these people that have really good weed and they don't seem to work a whole lot. And they're always going to see music. And like, I want to do whatever that is. Like, however they're pulling that off, I need to figure it out. And so I had a big thing where you could go to Red Rocks, you still can, and be the first person in line and get front row. Mm-hmm. And I realized it was like the greatest hippie networking tool of all time, that if I would go to Red Rocks for every big show and get in line all day, which meant partying all day at Red Rocks, like it wasn't a problem for me. That I could go in and get front row and then meet a bunch of people. And so I would always get 20, 30 feet of the front row whenever I'd go for all the hippie shows. And I met so many people that way.
Right.
And one of them was our homie Bear. I don't know if you ever met Bear.
Yep,
but
I know Bear.
Bear came down and he had a little container of sour diesel and a little container of super silver haze. And I had smoked sour diesel a few times and it was like, I could tell you where I was.
This is early 2000s.
Yeah, like 2003-ish or something like that. And so he was like, thanks for front row. Here's some weed. And it was the best weed I'd ever seen in my life. And I was like, could I grow that? And he was like, yeah, I can get you plants tomorrow. And we traded phone numbers. And I was like, I thought it was just like high talk, 24 hours later, this guy was like, where do you want me to bring these plants? I'm delivering them today. And I was living in, with Ryan Parsons. Mm-hmm. And so I'd grown like outdoor, like failed and like, just put seeds out and microwaved weed and done all the dumb stuff in high school. But my first legitimate grow was me and Parsons. And we had a house at like 6th in Colorado. And it was a really nice like family home. And we took a room in the basement and built the whole thing out in one day. And we were off to the races after that.
It's so funny because that's how a lot of us got going back then, was just like, okay, we found a house that's going to get us going. We'll put up 6 lights. Yeah. This is, and back then it was definitely, it was definitely more lucrative than we'll say it is now. Sure.
I always tell people that the paranoia was the hardest part and selling it was the easiest part. And now the selling it is the hardest part and the paranoia is the easiest part. It was a trip. It was great times though. And I learned a lot out there at the, small stakes. I always say like, we got to build a runway for so long and make all the mistakes that people are making just so like blatantly easy for us to recognize, but only because I've messed it up every single way possible in those small basements.
No, 100%.
We didn't know about electricians yet. And so we would run extension cords to plugins. And if it blew the breaker, we wouldn't use it. And if not, we would. And when I went to move from that place, there was an extension cord melted into an outlet. Like I should have burnt the house down. Like so crazy that we got away with so much back then. But again, the hardest part was just like, can you get over the fear of having it at your house versus now there's nothing to worry about. You can do it legally, but it's so hard to sell. But
yeah, I mean, it's really got to be good nowadays. It's so funny hearing you tell those stories because I remember pulling the wires out of walls that were up in the bathroom, and I disconnect the outlet in the bathroom and I pull the wire down into the basement and I just use that plug. Yeah. You'd have like a girl come over and she'd get a plug in her hairdryer and she'd be like, why does this outlet not work? And you're
sorry.
like, there's no wires that go to that thing. Pick another one, you know, and she's in the kitchen, like blowing her hair dry. So any crazy stories? You know, it's funny you said that about, you know, people taking, you know, people who were growing weed didn't seem to work a whole lot, because I did an interview when I was working at Grassroots, and they always ask me, how'd you get your start in why'd you start growing weed? And I was like, well, because I wanted more time to go snowboarding. Like, that's really the thing, is like, I just want more time to ski, especially when we were in our 20s. And as I know of you, you are a shredder when it comes to the skis. So I know you took that time, and that's probably when you were cutting your turns is in those younger years. Cause as I said, I've skied with you in our 40s, and like, you still tear it up for sure. For sure. Any crazy stories from like pre-legalization? Like, yeah, I mean, obviously,
I got some good ones that just popped into my head. I got to go to Boulder one time, and with some old school hippies who are like hemp activists from the late 80s, early 90s, and just like real crazy weed people from back in the day. And they took me to see two houses. And the first one was a guy, it was like a cabin out in the mountains, and a guy had hand dug with a shovel through the basement, through the closet. There was no basement, a whole ass room, like the size of the room we're sitting in right now. It dug out with a shovel, framed with 2x4s. It had a living soil, raised dirt bed, like 8-lighter that was, it was through a trap door.
What was his name?
I don't even remember.
You know who that sounds like, bro? It sounds like the Diamond Mines guy.
Oh yeah.
That's hilarious.
This is like Netherland area.
Yeah. Jamestown, Netherland, that whole area.
But that spot had a lot of.
Yeah, there was a lot of those. Yeah, I think everyone was doing that. But then the same place. So we drive like 20 miles and go see this other place, and it was a big, huge, nice house with a no basement, and they raised the house up and poured a sub-ground basement, and to make it look like the house didn't have a basement. And you went in through a closet, and it was like, you know, like a 60 lighter or something. It was the biggest weed grow I'd ever seen in my life. And I was just so blown away that I could ever seen anything like that. You know what I mean? It was so impressive.
People always talk about California, and I'm not discounting that California definitely had some crazy shit going on. But I think for the guys like us who've lived here, you know, 20, 30 years, some of the stuff that was going on in Netherland, Jamestown, like all the mountains out Bailey, all the mountains outside of Denver, bro, they were putting up some weight for sure, dude. For sure.
Well, I got the memo and quickly moved to Conifer and was up in Conifer for 10, 12 years. You know what I mean? And that's exactly it. You found a place where you could be, where you didn't want to talk to your neighbors, and your neighbors didn't want to talk to you. And the number one thing I always tell people, like back in the day, the hardest part about not getting in trouble was your neighbor and your neighbor getting up and going to work every day.
Or a pissed off girlfriend.
Yeah.
Those are the two things. If you had a pissed off girlfriend, or you had a neighbor that was like, damn, that house smells, you know?
Or the dumb stuff like, dang, I've left and gone to work 20 times in the last 20 days, and there's still not tire tracks on this guy's driveway.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like people, you'd have to like really be strategic about the way you thought back then, because, and I was just living. That's, if you wanted that lifestyle, you were in the mountains, you were at your house, you were hanging out, doing nothing. And I loved it. But, yeah, you'd have to like drive up and down the driveway so that there was tire tracks, and you'd have to like, you know, turn your lights on at 6 a.m. sometimes. So they're like, man, this guy never wakes up.
I've mentioned to GRAMBO in the past, the challenge for me was always having the one house on the block that didn't have snow on the roof.
Yeah. I coined that. I call that the Dutch shovel.
Yeah, Dutch shovel. I like it.
But like you're driving down the block, you're like, whoa, what is that house? And there's snow on it. It's like, oh, damn it. You know,
yeah, that's so funny.
So how did being in the illegal market evolve to going to the legal market? I know for a lot of us, that was a challenge. You know, that was like, hey, am I going to make this move? Do I think this is actually going to be something that's viable? When did you make that move? And what was your decision making in going from the basement to, let's say, the warehouse?
Yeah. So I was always like, so, I wished it could be legal. I wished I could follow the rules. Like I wanted to do it as a job and I wanted to have a legitimate business. And so we all had like, you could, in Colorado in this time, I know you know this, but for the listeners, you could get your medical card and it would give you 6 plants that you could grow, and anyone else could designate you their medical caregiver and you could grow their 6 plants. And so I always at my house had a big, huge stack of caregiver cards and people who had me as their caregiver. And I'd heard stories that luckily I never had to go through it, but I'd heard stories of the police coming to someone's house, knocking, saying you're growing weed, saying, yes, I am. Here's my medical cards. And they probably still could have enforced it, but probably just got enough reason to not want to have the long night of fucking counting plants and doing paperwork. And so they would leave. And so I always was leaning towards as legal as I could, and then got an opportunity. There was a girl who was growing weed at a place called the Lodo Wellness Center, which is one of the probably first 30 medical stores in Colorado that turned into one of the first 14.
Guys were right off a Spear, right?
Actually, 16th and Wazee.
Okay.
And it just closed. It just closed like in the last 6 months, I think.
Crazy.
But it was supposed to be a clinic grow, and the folks from the clinic, the building was like licensed and available, and the owner of the building was going to partner with the clinic. And then he didn't like the way the deal was going. And so he bailed and did his own thing. And he had this girl who was a friend of ours, my ex and I's, who was growing there, and it was too big for her. And this was so early in the day that they didn't have any money for equipment. They didn't have any money to like build out a grow, and they didn't have a clue how to do it. They just had a store that was doing like $500 a day. That was at 16th and Wazee in the heart of Lodo. Great location. And the owner of the building was the owner of the store, which made a lot of things possible that weren't possible back then. And so I met with them, showed them some jars of weed from my basement, and was like,
backpack days. We've talked about that on the show in the past.
It was very much well, when I showed them the weed, they were like, can we buy all this? And can you grow this for us at our place?
Just for reference, there's a time where as a home grower, you could take your weed to the dispensary, and if it was great, they'd buy it and sell it. Weed was good back then.
Oh my God. Yeah. I used to fill up my truck with like as many pounds as I could get. And then also unrooted clones of sour diesel. I had these huge ass mobs of sour diesel, and I would get the trays of 50, and I'd get like 12 trays of 50 and like 9 pounds, and drive around and come home with like $87,000 cash. You're like, this was the greatest day of my life. And whenever I tell my story, I always talk about there's so many epitaph moments, so many moments where you wish that could have been it. Like, okay, I wish I could just sell backpack weed and clones for the rest of my life and have this never change. And it's gotten better and better and better and cooler and cooler. Obviously, we're in a weird situation right now with the entire industry, but overall trajectory and growth of this thing has been such a blast for so long. And so showed them the weed. They said, if you can bring in your own equipment, you can have some ownership and be my partner. And I was like, cool, I'll fill this thing up with equipment. So filled it up with equipment, built it all out, and we were off to the races growing weed in downtown Denver in a building from the 1800s with a deli with a wood floor above us and low ceilings and homeless people peeing in the intakes for the lights. And I mean, like it was as bad as it could possibly be. And what's funny is as I started to, we started to grow really, really good weed out of there, and we were growing the fire, and it was just because we loved it. We were there every day, and we had good genetics, and we figured out how to manipulate the environment.
Powdery mildew wasn't here yet. Russet mites weren't here yet.
Clean genetics. It was so easy back then.
We had spider mites, but that was the only big issue in Colorado.
Totally.
Like before 2013. Powdery mildew, russet mites, none of that. Aphids. We didn't have any of those freaking problems here.
And if anybody wonders why we got it, why we didn't have it is because we were all good growers and we were responsible and we took care of our shit. Why we did get it is as soon as the industry got flooded with growers, everyone was lazy. They thought they could use chemicals instead of a clean room. And it just turned into an absolute shit show. Those were the low hanging fruit days. So we were growing the chronic. And I started, because of the growth of the industry and because of just the luck I had, I started to like build my name, and I was always so ashamed to take people to that grow because it was little and it was like,
how many lights we talking?
40-ish or so.
Which, I mean, not for nothing. That's that back then. That was right.
Yeah, it was on the cusp. Yeah, but I was already thinking like, it's not a 200 lighter, it's not a big, huge warehouse. And so I would always be ashamed of it. But what's funny is then I went and started going to see the nicest grows in the country. And I realized like, I'm growing weed in this 1987, Cutlass Supreme. These guys can't drive these Ferraris to save their lives. No. And so I was so proud of it. And honestly, like to this day in my business, it's like, I can help you. The way I can help you the most is if you have the least. Like my guys are really great at designing and building out insane facilities, but like if you need to like turn a horse trailer into a weed grow for the week, like I'm your guy.
So how does what I know the story. What was your big break when it came to cultivation? Cause I see if it's the same story, I think you'll tell is, Mary's, right? Mary's was kind of your big, as I remember, wasn't that a big thing for you as far as taking over that outdoor garden?
Maggie's Farm.
Maggie's Farm. That's what it is.
Yeah. It's a little bit, that is the grow break. I left Loto Wellness and my ex and I were the growers there, and we decided to not be together anymore. And it was very amicable, but I was like, hey, I'm going to give you the head grower job down here and take our ownership, do your thing with it. And I'm going to move on and start this consulting business. And the first thing I'm going to do is go work for Vicente Cederberg, which is the attorneys that wrote Amendment 64 in Colorado. And I'd become friends with them and had a wealthy friend investor guy who was interested in what I was doing at the dispensary and had me hire them to write a business plan for us for a business that we ended up not doing together. But through that process, I became friends with those guys and got to know those guys, and then started hanging out with them, just like going to concerts and smoking weed. And I'd met Mason Trevert, who was running Safer, which was the organization that got the cannabis on the ballot in 2004 and then again in 14. Or not 2004, 2000. I guess that would have been
2008 or 10.
Six was when we legalized it in Denver, and then for the city of Denver. And then in 2010, we tried to legalize it for the state. It got shut down. Then in 2014, we got it. And, but I'd known those guys through that whole period of time and just like saw them at Telluride Bluegrass and would give them half the weed in my pocket. Like I was always like, however I can help, please let me know. Cause they were like heroes of mine. And then fast forward, I was leaving the dispensary and Anna Cozy, I don't know how dirty we could talk on the show, but Anna Cozy got in trouble for forging some licenses and got in a bunch of trouble. And I heard that she had been doing consulting for them. And I was like, no way. Like, that's like, if she should be doing it, I should be doing it, is what I thought in my head, at least. And maybe I was arrogant, maybe I was stupid, but I know that we had taught her a lot of the stuff that she was using to get, well known with, which was our genetics and the way we used to grow it. And so I felt very confident reaching out to them and being like, hey, I can do the same thing she was doing, but I didn't want to do that. But after she got arrested, I was just basically like, hey, I have a consulting company and I have a lot of integrity and I really care about the plant. And like, if you could ever give me a shot, let me know. That led to them giving me an interview. They brought me on as a compliance officer, which is really funny because they couldn't sell like ethically. Lawyers that are helping legalize an illegal plant is one thing. Hiring someone to their firm that can help someone do it better is like really bad law ethics. And I never understood it when I was working for them, but they were like always having me meet with this guy, the head of ethics for their attorney's office. And they wouldn't tell me why. And then after I left, I figured it out, but I worked for him for 6 months. Was a compliance officer, learned all about the laws and the rules. And like when I first started growing legally, we didn't even have, we wrote with a white pen on the pot, the name of the strain. We didn't have a sticker, a tag. There was nothing. There was no metric.
No nothing.
And so for me to like have to learn all that at once, like most growers have to in states that legalize really quickly.
It's the part where it's not our wheelhouse.
And I got like such a slow introduction where it's like, okay, now we're going to put tags on them. Okay. Or like stickers. Okay. Now we got to tag the plant. Now we got to log into a computer. Now we got to use metric. But through that whole process, I got a very slow interaction with it, and then went and worked for the lawmakers that taught me everything about the laws and regulations. And that made me a much better grower because I was like, okay, well now I know the rules and I'm not going to get a place shut down because it's way bigger stakes than just some hippies growing weed. And so I worked for them for like around 6 months, and I only came on full time for like the last 2 weeks. And after like 2 weeks, I was like, I can't work for somebody.
Right.
And Christian Cederberg, who's one of my best friends, was one of the partners. And I went to him and I was just like, hey man, like, I'm really not digging like working in an office and like, I'm going to go crazy and this isn't who I am. And he was like, I'll never forget. It's the kindest thing anyone's ever said. He's like, well, I think you're partner level material and you'll never be a partner here because you're not a lawyer and you're a weed grower. But he's like, I see your talent. He's like, what would be your ideal situation? And I was like, what if I just got to open my own consulting company and you guys gave me all your clients that needed help? And he was like, done, let's do it. And so that led to Maggie's Farm. A guy, the owner of Maggie's Farm.
Thought it's funny because I thought it was the other way around.
Oh yeah.
I knew, and for those of our listeners who don't know, Brian Vicente, Christian Cederberg, those guys were the guys that were instrumental in writing the regulations and laws in Colorado, in which those are the laws that then got mimicked around the country. And so what they did for cannabis is truly, truly instrumental throughout the entire country. We're actually going to talk about, I was going to bring it up a little bit later because I thought the order was the other way around. But, those guys are, I think when the history books go back 50 years and they talk about the history of cannabis, Vicente Cederberg will be at the forefront of that.
And Steve Fox and Mason Trevert.
Yeah. And Mason a shout out to all those guys because they really were the mouth for a lot of us through the Cole memorandum, through legalization, where I remember meeting with Brian, I think in 2009, and having a consultation because I wanted to start a business with him and he was the only person you could talk to about it at the time. Yeah. So the fact that, shout out to those guys because the fact that you were able to hook up with those guys, really that was your, I always talk about Jimmy Iovine and Interscope Records about how he got his big breaks, with Bruce Springsteen and John Lennon, but that truly is, your break and it really, good on you for being in the right place at the right time. Let's talk about the Maggie's thing. Yeah. Cause that's, that propelled you into a whole different realm.
Dude, I literally went from a basement with 40 lights to 50 acres of outdoor. It wasn't all planted, but he had these massive farms and he was all organic and he was working directly with Subcool and getting bomb ass genetics. And we were breeding in-house, and that was all just brand new to me. It was all living a dream though, because I wanted to do it so bad. The funny thing is I was living in Idaho Springs and it was there was a grow in Florence and a grow in Pueblo. And I would have to get up at 3:30 in the morning and leave by 4 and drive 6 hours to get to Florence and then 2 hours to get to Pueblo and then 4.5 hours home without traffic every single day I worked there. And it was the most money I'd ever made in my life. Per day I was making, it was $2,000 a day or something like that. And I loved it so much. All I wanted to do is get down to these farms and get to these plants. But I had I was living at home and had to grow at my house and had dogs and just couldn't just leave for the week, which I should have just left for the week and stayed down there. But I was just driving my ass off, but learning so much. And
50 acre from 40 lights to 50 acres. Yeah. That's hello.
And back to outdoor. And my first, I'd grown outdoor again in high school and college, but nothing of substance and nothing besides a few plants from Holland that I'd bring home, a few seeds, and didn't know what I was doing and didn't know how to breed. And so, just got my mind blown down there. And Bill, the owner, is an old school deadhead hippie, crazy cowboy grower. Picture that show Yellowstone, but of growing weed. He's a wild dude, man. It's not killing people and stuff, but just a crazy guy. And there's all these old stories about him, loading horse trailers out full of a whole outdoor harvest and taking it to the shows on the East Coast. And he's a legend for sure. And I learned so much from him, learned how to breed plants, learned how we had 3 rows of fuck it rows of 300 plants that we got to do anything we wanted to. It's if these look healthy, you're doing something wrong, or only one should look healthy. And so we were just trying tons of fertilizer and tons of drying methods of drying the plants out and getting them insanely dry or overwatering and just so many different things. And that's where I learned about raised dirt beds and, large scale agricultural irrigation for plants that size. We didn't have drip systems out there. And so we were hand watering and we built these drip systems that you could bring in and lay out and water the plants and then take it to the next row because there were so many acres of weed out there. And yeah, it was wild. And he had like old school, like buried containers for drying and curing, and which obviously were buried for different reasons, but climate control.
This is what we use them for now.
Yeah. But we didn't have power out there. And so we were running off generators, and it was like almost like how much, and this is back when, you know, they had a great brand name around. There was the first brand in Colorado, really. And man, it was so much fun to be a part of, just watching, like, getting to see that much flower getting harvested every year. Cause I truly say, like, the equation for a good grower is probably like plants and how many plants have you harvested and how many harvests have you had?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you know, you can't learn much better than 2,000 harvests. And we were harvesting so many plants and so much out there. We built their first greenhouses, their first light depths, just like really brought it along to the stuff that I was understanding. And also was working at a place called Silver Peak Apothecary, which is up in Aspen.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a huge nexus. Like it was like a $25-30 million greenhouse that got built in basalt. And that was, I got that job too. And so,
and this is all through the consulting.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And it's so funny. They tried to get me to be the head grower there. And, like, I'll never forget the day I walked into that Nexus greenhouse. I'd never seen a $20 million weed grow before. And I was so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go sell used cars. Like, this is so out of my league. Like, I'm just a basement grower from Lodo Wellness. and I walk in and there's all these scientists in white coats measuring micromoles of light. I didn't know what a micromole was then. I was like, oh man, I'm so fucked. And I walk into the
I so relate to this.
Yeah. And so I walk into the fucking bedroom and the plants are like 16 feet tall, never been touched by human hands, no scissors, no nothing. And they're like, so when do they get buds on them? And I was like, oh, I'm going to be in this for the rest of my life. Like, I was like, I don't know all this shit, but I know how to grow fucking pot and I'm going to be just fine. And so I was like, you guys haven't ever pruned these? Like, no, we didn't think you prune them. And I was like, yeah, you got to prune these down and, like, you got to flip them into flour. And, like, you know, they had an Argus system. They didn't even know how to use it. I started, like, I learned my first Argus system by, like, reading the instruction manual and pushing buttons and shit because no one knew how to use it there. But it was such a cool time and such a cool experience. And again, so much runway got built underneath the feet of my own, you know, if I messed up, it was my own jar of weed or Lodo Wellness. You know, we could sell, we weren't selling more than we could grow, but it was a very close balance. And so always in a position to where I got to grow so slowly with the industry that it never, like, flew past me. I was always just kind of like staying in step with it, you know?
You know, shifting gears a little bit, you know, now you're, you know, at this point you're consulting, you're kind of starting to talk to other people. You know, your company emphasizes blending traditional cannabis culture with kind of modern business practices, you know? Yeah. How do you balance these elements in your cultivation? You know, one thing I've always respected about you guys, is, you know, you're a good blend of bringing tech and culture to whatever facilities you're operating in. Speak to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I first started growing, my only philosophy was I wanted to grow the best cannabis on the planet. That was all I cared about. And anything that got in the way of that got cut out, and anything that helped was all on board. And so it worked really well at Lodo Wellness Center, and it worked really well in the black market. Like, I was always able to sell my weed for $4,100 a pound. At Lodo Wellness, we were selling as much as we could, you know, as fast as we could grow it. And when I started getting into consulting, it was the first time ever that I realized that, like, I can't fight this battle with every single person. And they're not going to hire me. And I also was like, back then it was like, you could be pretty picky with who you were helping because, you know, it was so few of us. Now I feel like it's the opposite. But back then, you know, I could also, like, I sold myself as plant first. I sold myself as like human capital, environment, and genetics are how we're going to either be successful or fail in this business. And it's the exact same pitch I give today. And, but back then people actually bought into the idea and wanted to be like, they wanted to grow the best. Now it's so much different now it's like bottom line and dollars and P&Ls and, you know, and I understand all those things have to exist, but to build something special and to be successful in the industry ever, like let Green Dot Dave be the, you know, the messiah of this.
Very much so.
Yeah. That like, you know, as a market ebbs and flows, no matter what, if you're the best, you're always going to be successful. And so we always fight for that. But then we're getting to your point where we have to blend technology. We have to blend mass production. So like, you know, a good example is I was a HPS grower and you were never going to tell me that an LED was ever going to work for me. And then I went to, there was a Photo X summit that Fluence puts on.
Mm-hmm.
They'd put it on a few times, but like many, many years ago, they put on their first one and I went to it just to tell them that their shit wasn't going to work. And by the end of the week, I was like, man, I got to figure out how to make this work. Like, you know, and I've learned so much of what I have to do is blend what I do around the constraints of the state that we're in, of the client, of the budget, but always keeping the plant and people first if possible. Mm-hmm. And like, if it gets to a point where we're just completely like not doing that, then we're in the wrong job and we need to be somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. As I remember, you know, now you're, you know, at this point, you know, in the discussion, you're fully in the consulting gig. You're kind of helping people all around the country. As I remember, you've won the most licenses in the country. At least I thought that was true for a while. For a non-MSO, like for an independent person applying for licenses, we have to have one of the best records. Some crazy stuff. Like IPA Mike and Jill asked me to be on my first ever application as a consulting, as a cannabis expert for their license application. It was in New York when New York gave out 5 licenses. Mm-hmm. And this was like some of the most competitive licenses in the world at this time. Like I bet people were spending upwards of $5 to $10 million on these applications. And we like flew out and got our fingerprints done and like Jill added the narrative and me and Mike were just like the faces of it. And we fucking won the license. And it was the first competitive merit-based application in the whole country. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that my name was on that, I think I got like a couple $1,000. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't like, it was nothing of like, it was just something to write on my resume. Mm-hmm. And that is like literally where things took off because they publicly announced who all the people were that won the licenses and what the names of the experts were on the licenses. And Mike and I both, there was like a New York Times article about he and I's criminal backgrounds. I had a speeding ticket that was unpaid in Arizona and he had like a possession charge. I don't even remember what it was, but there was an article about us and I was like, oh wow, this must have been a big deal. Like there's people like writing the media slander about me who I am no one. And so then Hawaii did an application and Vicente Cederberg asked me, at this point, we're good friends. Like, do you want to do this Hawaii application? And they only gave out one per island and we won that one. And so then I was like, I'm hot now. I'm 2 for 2. And then we did Maryland and we won Maryland and I got ownership in that one and that's Culta. And then I went and worked with Eugene on a GTI one and we won first place in that one. And then I had switched to a different team and we won that one. I was like, oh shit. Like, and this is getting really good. What do you think? I mean, what do you think was your secret, bro?
I think it was winning that first one and then having every time we would do the next one, they would see the experience and be like, okay, this guy absolutely, you know, like there's only been 3 licenses and he's won all 3 of them. Like there's obviously he's good at doing this. And at this point, there was never even proof of concept if I could help him bring him to market or not. And like the Etain one in New York, I didn't even get to work with him after that. Like it was just, we won the license and it was gone. The one in Hawaii, they wanted me to move out there. I didn't want to move to Hawaii. I know. Well, yeah. I told myself to not take the first 10 consulting jobs I had because I assumed that they were all going to offer me head growing jobs and all 10 of them did. And I made a deal with myself. And by about number 6, I was like, okay, that was the smartest thing you've ever done in your life. Like, I don't want to own one set of problems, one set of plants. And if I do, I'm doing a disservice to the industry because at this point I'm on a freaking rocket ship and everything's going great.
You've hooked up a lot of the homies too. I mean, you offered me the job at Culta. I just had a different gig going on, but you hooked up Jay. You've hooked up a lot. I mean, you've definitely tried to share the ride with a bunch of your homies, including some of the guys on your consulting team. I mean, those guys, the team that you've built to help you write licenses and go in there. You got some badasses.
Yeah. And I've made those guys my partners now. Like I just wanted to be a part of whatever they're doing, because the greatest skill I have is I can motivate people, but then I can identify badasses and who's full of shit. Mm-hmm. And I've identified 2 complete and total badasses who are now my business partners and the smartest people I've ever met in the industry. One is Jeremy, who at the next license we won was Buckeye Relief, and we got first place in Ohio. And that was very, very competitive.
Yep.
And our client had broken dirt and poured concrete before we even won the license.
And Ohio was tough because, as I remember, you had to build it to like whatever drawings got accepted.
That was it.
That was it.
Yep.
It had to be to those drawings, So I remember Ohio being especially competitive.
And this was the first time I ever worked with somebody who started the business himself, was self-made, funded the whole thing himself, and was like, it was the first one he was like, there is no budget. And I was like, oh shit, I'm in trouble now. Like I'm used to, I can put it in
here's the cap.
Yeah. Like, and so having no budget, I didn't want to underbuild it. I didn't want to undershoot it. And that's the first grow I ever put LEDs into. And we used, we used a lot of technology that I still hadn't had proven concept to me, but it was just such a time that we couldn't fuck this grow up. And it's honestly like the bell cow in the country, if you ask for my opinion. It's like, it's not, I think where we get into big trouble is people trying to acquire footprint over quality. And that's where the whole downturn in this entire industry has happened, is that people went after footprint when not knowing that they were not going to have the human capital to help out. And they were not going to have the ability to be spread so thin and to still grow quality plants. And so, Buckeye is like 25,000 square feet. We built it to be double stacked, but we didn't double stack it. We put all the rough-ins, the plug-ins, the HVAC, everything, but we didn't do the second set of tables and second set of lights. And we mastered one level first. And then after we were good at it and we had a team and we had, like cohesion and we were ripping harvest and gathering data, then we dropped in the second rack on everything, which makes everything twice as hard. That. And it was so much more seamless. And now they have like the hugest piece of the market share in that state. They're
good market to be in.
Yeah, it is. It's
good
great.
market.
Super limited grow licenses.
What do you think is one of the biggest things? Now that you've been in it such a long time, what do you think is one of the biggest things that people overlook when they're building these facilities, when they're creating these facilities? Where do you think people miss the mark?
I think I just nailed it. They're going for footprint. I think this is what happens. You write them a budget and a pro forma, and they're like, oh man, you're telling me that if I have 10,000 square feet, I can make $2 million a year. So that means I want 80,000 square feet so I can make $16 million.
Yeah.
And they realize that the diminishing return on scale is so detrimental. And the number one piece is just human capital. Like it all boils down to, I've said it twice already, but I'll jump into it actually, is that like, if on a granular level inside these grows, and this is something that you can preach as long as I preach it, is if you walk in and everybody doesn't give a shit and it's just a job and they're just dragging their asses waiting for 5 o'clock, you'll know in the plants right away. And also if you walk into a facility and there's a culture and a vibe and there's music playing. I recently toured Green Dot's Denver grow. Dave and Jeff took me around and it was just like mind blowing how happy the people were and how happy the plants were. And also if you have happy plants, that makes happy people. Like I loved my whole life. I've grown
transverse. Because, we always talk about the secret life of plants and how plants are sentient. And if you have a crew that's in a crabby mood, guess what? Garden's probably not going to look that good.
When you watch plants in fast motion, they're like, they sway around like people, they dance, they do all this stuff. I remember the first time I saw plants fall asleep. I was like, oh, look how adorable they are.
Totally.
It's a vibe, man.
Yeah, it's so cool. And like, I think that most places they think that if they spend the money up front, like, the original like capital expenditures, that they're going to have this like factory that turns out tires or wheels, but these are plants and this is magic and it's art and it's a blend of science and art and business. And so I think that they underestimate, like they think, well, I spent $40 million on this thing. It's going to perform. It's going to turn it on. Money. Yeah. And then also people just miss the pendulum swings. Like the reason pendulum swings happen is like if you ever been to a music festival and like the headliner's coming on, the traffic getting to the headliner, like, man, I should have left 10 minutes early. That's the pendulum swings in the cannabis industry, is like, as soon as there's so much demand and so little supply, and then everyone just loads up on the supply end and it swings over this way and it just knocks the demand out of the park.
Yep.
And there's like, I always talk about, people do these budgets and these pro formas, and because they're going for footprint, they'll be in a market that like, and I'm just making easy numbers up, but let's say a state has $100 million market cap for cannabis. And there's these companies that are building out these business plans and pro formas to capture, they're saying we're going to make $70 million this year. So you're going to have 70% of the market share in a market. Like, do you understand how asinine that is? In states where there's 20, 30, 40 producers, like it just makes absolutely no sense. Who's going to buy this stuff? And that's what I always stress to people, is like the actual money in cannabis is at a cash register in a dispensary. That's where the money changes hands. And if you're not planning at that granular level on how much you're growing and what strains you're growing and what products you're making and how you're diversifying and keeping it cheap, like that, you're going to lose your entire business. And I think that's what we're seeing, is people think if you build it, there's someone's going to come buy it and smoke it. And it's just not the case when you've outproduced a market by 400-500%, In which,
I always attribute the crash to Oklahoma basically overgrowing the entire country. They grew enough. I can't remember what year it was, if it was 2020 or 21, but they grew enough weed to supply the entire country multiple times over, you know? So no, I can't disagree with that sentiment at all. Having had so much exposure in so many different markets, what do you think are some of the biggest changes you've seen? How do you think it's evolved over, let's say, from 2010 to now? Because obviously we started, it's funny talking about your first grow, and, my first grow was at 6th and Calumet, 80 lights. And I can tell you right now, like, we walked in and we were like, holy shit, this place is huge, and now you and I have both seen places, I've toured Culta many, many times, in which you guys have acres of not just indoor, but you have greenhouse, you have outdoor, you're running autos, you're running all kinds of different stuff, so like, what do you think about the evolution and what you've seen? Because first off, did you think it would be like this? Like, when you guys first opened Culta, did you envision what's out there now? Or, you want to always have big, huge dreams, but you never want to like outkick the coverage and, like do something that's so big and stupid. That I'm always on the side of like cautiously optimistic. And so I didn't realize that the market was going to go the direction it did. I hoped it did, but you just never know, especially in these new immature markets. I think I speak a lot to people about mature versus immature markets, and a mature market is going to be California, Colorado, Washington, anywhere where there was an established cannabis market, black market, that it just simply became legalized. And, but there was already like business around it and numbers and large amounts of consumers and people, in these newer markets, like the brand new, like a Maryland, you know that people love to smoke weed on the East Coast, but you don't know how brave they're going to be going to get their medical card. You don't know how comfortable they're going to be walking into a dispensary or showing their ID. Those were the big hurdles back then. And so we couldn't have predicted the growth. It went great. And, I'm always on the side of like a little bit more cautious. And our CEO at the time was very much a visionary and just like, let's go for it. And so I would always be like, well, if you're willing to risk it, I'll build it for you. And Luke, the VP of my company, he was actually living out there at the time during most of those expansions, but before Jay, and then Jay replaced Luke. And so I've always had like one of my best friends there on site since day one. And that's allowed us to like
know that we're not going to fuck it up. Like it'll be planned right. It'll get carried out right. And whether or not people buy the weed or not, we never make that our problem, you know?
Yeah. And Jay's been there, what, 8 years?
Yeah. Something like that.
Pretty wild. I mean, yeah, we were two of the first guys to really help start that market. And, Jay lasted a lot longer than I did.
He's doing great, man. He's doing great. And I'll tell you, it's not easy living out in the middle of nowhere.
On the Eastern Shore. Yeah, no, it's tough out there. I mean, at least for me, I grew up in Philly, so I could be in Philly in a couple hours, or I could be in Baltimore in 30 minutes. Even where he's at, it's tough. It's tough living out that far. So, mad respect. And you guys have done amazing work out there. You really have, definitely one of the premier cultivators in Maryland. And, when I was there, it was pretty much me and Jay versus each other, in which, we were growing different genetics, but we pretty much had the fire in the state. So, Jay's definitely one of the homies. Let's see. How do you, let's see, we'll talk about compliance because that's an important one. Navigating the complex regulatory landscape. It's crucial in cannabis businesses. I always say to people, the number one rule is protect the license, the license, So, how do you guide your clients into protecting the license in these individual markets? Yeah.
It's almost like, it's like you can't drive a car without keys. Like the first thing you got to have is compliance. And if you're compliant, then you get to grow weed. That's what I always teach people. And
which is hard for us because we're, originally from the black market. We're like, weigh a plant when you take it down. Like, what the fuck?
Well, and I'm telling you that 6 months I did the compliance officer for Vicente Cedarburg. Like it just, again, it was such a great, baby step for me to not have to follow the rules, but just learn the rules and enforce the rules, which made it a lot easier to go back and follow the rules. And so now whenever I'm opening a new facility, we're almost always partnering with Vicente Cedarburg on getting the education of the laws and being, way up to speed. And also what's crazy is in a lot of these places in these new markets, you can go fight to get a law changed. The law isn't the law for sure, ever, I guess, but especially in these new programs where they're like, hey, we know we're going to make some mistakes. And so just let us know. And so we'll go in and like in Massachusetts, you couldn't spray anything at all, not even water. And we fought for things like that to change. And so being optimistic and knowing that nothing is set in stone, but also following the rules and being hyper. I mean, the cool thing is if you're not collecting data at this point, you're not going to have your facility for very long. You have to be data driven or else, because it's gotten so granular with the cost of everything. And so compliance is just data. And it's where we're so resistant, I think myself, was actually getting in the computer and logging in the information. Funny story, when Metric came out, it was called MIPS first. Yep. And MIPS opened up and they just emailed you one day and they're like, here's this program. You got to be up and running on it in the next 4 months or something like that. And we were like, fuck that. We're not doing that shit. And so we literally didn't. The day it came on, we just didn't do it. Yeah. And then after 3 months, they came down to our store, our dispensary. They're like, so we logged into your MIPS and we noticed that there's never been a login before. And we're like, yeah. And they shut us down. And then this is when we were doing $50,000 days because it was right after rec legalization in 2014. And so we were like, oh fuck, this is bad. And we had to literally go in and 9 months of receipts and get them to fit into, and it was honestly, there was no math to it. We were just plugging numbers into places until things were full, until things reconciled. And then we gave it to them. We're like, they're certainly not going to take this. And we handed it to them and they're like, okay, you're good. Didn't even look at it. We're like, yeah. So we were able to shut down for 2 or 3 days, but it was yeah, man, that old MIPS.
I'll never forget. Same time, we actually had, I'm sure you remember, they were actual cops.
Oh yeah.
And they would they'd have badges and stuff. And so we had them show up to our grow and they knocked on the door and they opened the door and they go, hey, we've been looking in the computer. We have a gun that scans the building. We know that none of your plants are tagged in this building. Have them tagged by Monday or else we're shutting you down. So I call up my manager and I'm like, dude, we gotta tag every plant in the building. What the fuck? And we start doing it. And the lady calls us back on Monday And she's like, hey, I can see that you guys have been tagging plants. Just keep it up and we'll be in good shape, but they never even came back, but I'll never forget them showing up. And we're like, this is back. We're like smoking weed in the buildings and stuff that.
Yeah.
Like we're totally breaking the rules.
Here's my philosophy on that. I've spoken a lot on that. We did not we gave the impression to the rest of the country that like we wrote laws, we implemented them, and everything worked perfect. It was very much a like give and take between the enforcement divisions and us, the growers. Like we fucked up so many times and could have been shut down so many times. And they were just like, but if they did it, they would ruin it for the whole global economy of cannabis. And them, by us creating this image and them being cool enough about it while we learned the rules, we were able to give off the impression that we had our shit together. And I believe truly that's what legalized weed around the whole country.
I don't disagree. I mean, us, I'm not going to dispute California, played its role. I think people go back and forth about it, but the reality is us giving actual legalization, rec legalization in 2014 or 13, whatever it was, it definitely paved the way for, the West Coast fell within another 3 years.
Totally.
And I feel like if we hadn't done that, it definitely might have kind of stifled everything going the way it did. And not for nothing, it's my thought that rec legalization is really what pushed the medical market on the East Coast and in so many of these other places.
Absolutely. And the thing that California was ahead of us, but California just got it on the ballot and passed it. And then they never wrote any laws, no rules. There was no licensing. Okay. And Colorado was the first one to actually do all that.
And we put it in the Constitution.
Yeah. And legitimized it. And so what the difference being is, I'm sure you remember, dispensaries were getting raided like crazy by the federal government out there. And simply by writing the laws and enforcing, whether we were actually following them perfectly, which we weren't, but we were doing our best and we were creating the illusion that we were, that kept the federal presence out of Colorado. You never heard of as soon as we legalized medical and started our medical revolution, there was never one, the feds, there was the cartel dudes on, but if you were licensed and paying your bills and not doing dumb shit, there was no federal presence whatsoever. And so we just got it a little bit more right than California. That's all.
Share with me one of your most memorable success stories from consulting, be it a startup or be it saving someone's garden,
Yeah. Let me think of a cool one. Well, I'll tell you, this is an old school one. When I was working for Vicente Cederberg, my first week or two working there, and I'm supposed to be a compliance officer, all their clients, not all of them, but a whole bunch of them got in trouble. I'm sure you're going to remember this story. The Denver, the Department of Agriculture got with the fire department and got with the marijuana enforcement division. And they sent the fire department through every single grow to ask what chemicals you had on site in case there was a fire.
That might've been how Sacred Seed got busted.
And so everyone put they were honest because they're like, it's the fire department, who cares? And at this point, no one was enforcing pesticide rules and everyone was using illegal pesticides. It was at the peak of the use of it and they didn't have testing for it yet. So they couldn't find out if they were using it or not unless you admitted to it and they found it. So I'd been literally there for 8 days. And it's one of the luckiest when you look back on your life and you're like, I got really fucking lucky. I had 12 clients through Vicente Cederberg. I wasn't on my own business yet, but I was in these grows and I was helping them. I had always only sprayed organic. And so I had no idea even how to use these chemicals, but I knew how to spray organic and I knew how I had really good blends and SOPs around that stuff. And so I got thrust into 12 to 15 of the biggest grows in the country. In Colorado, I'm sorry, which is probably the country.
They probably were the country at the time.
Their biggest clients, and got to work along with their growers. And then that led me into I just already had a name in Colorado immediately. And then before all the licenses and all those things were happening, I was just driving around from grow to grow in my car all over Denver and Colorado, helping people with spraying. And then that turned into watering and that turned into, and that's the other piece of the puzzle is, even from the day we were black market growers, and I know you know this too, everywhere else in the country that was growing weed, if you had a weed grow, like one of your friends knew about it and like it was the biggest secret in the world. And we were all sharing information, growing the same strains with the same mediums and the same food.
Sour D with GH.
Yeah. And going to each other's houses and looking at it. And I learned so much so fast. And then that fast forwarded me into going to see all these big grows in Denver. And Denver is cool because it was before proof of concept. So it's like, I always talk about cities that were made before there was cars. So like Boston is so fucked to drive a car through, but like Denver's laid out on a grid. And cannabis, there's definitely industry standard now. There's like pretty much double stack or single stack. It's LED lights, it's rolling benches. They look all the same. If back then, like any fucking idea
we were doing all
on the planet, it's however you were doing it in your basement, or however your buddy that taught you from Vermont did it, is how it looked like. I'll never forget Anna did the pots full of the grow pebbles because
the hydroton. Because that's what I used to do.
When we showed her how to do it, that's what we were doing for like a 6-month period. And then we switched to something else, but she never learned it. And so that's how people were like so married to whatever they knew because it's the only way they knew. And I got to really, really like learn so much by just seeing other people's stuff and not being like, hey, you have to change this, but just if you do, try this, see it work, see it not work. And I was doing this on such a global level at the time, you know?
No, that's, that's really how you made a name for yourself. I mean, you were definitely doing a lot more consulting than most of the rest of us. And, a lot of that was not only the exposure with Vicente Cederberg, but having that experience of, and not for nothing, you're a big, likable guy. People like letting you in their gardens.
True. And I love weed so much. That's been my secret.
Well, that's the thing is you emanate cannabis. It's funny. I was going to intro the show as the Hug Dealer episode as opposed to the Jug Dealer episode because you famously wear the Hug Dealer hat.
Yeah, I got a bracelet too, Hug Dealer right here.
Oh, wow. I thought that was just a pun.
No. Wow. He is an official Hug Dealer. That's a real thing.
Thank God for people like you. It's like we have a predominantly home grow audience for the most part. And they're always back, commercial cannabis. And I take a lot of heat because I go, hey guys, there's hundreds of dispensaries. You can get good weed commercially. Yeah. Someone's going to run these facilities. I'm glad it's you, man. It's someone that actually loves weed.
I'm trying my hardest. And it's something that unfortunately, like I'd much rather be like have 40 lights and be just rocking it out of the park and growing the best weed I can. But I really love this plant and I really want to see access to everyone in the whole world people being able to gain access to it. And the more places that I work in, it's literally on a granular level of changing one mind at a time. And then where the good weed part comes in is most people don't want to pay for what it takes to smoke good weed and they want cheap THC and they don't care about sprayed terps and they don't care about, just distillate with fake terps in it as long as it gets them stoned. And I understand that that's definitely part of the culture that it's like, as I've gotten older, that's not me, that's the young culture, but that's who buys the majority of products in cannabis. And so it drives a lot of what the market does. But having said that, like experientially, one person at a time, having that, like, let's just call it the green jar versus the white jars. Every time you smoke the green jar, you're like, man, I didn't get a headache. I didn't get this terrible munchies. I laughed my ass off. I like interacted with my friends different and like as one by one, when people start to figure that out, you're becoming a connoisseur. A market is maturing. And as a market matures, then you have a place for connoisseurs. Then you have a place for high-end extracts. But until then, you have to just fight the fight and hope that they notice the difference between your stuff and all the other shit that's out there being grown, No,
well said. Well said. I think that's one of the biggest things, which actually leads me into my next question, which is, what emerging trends do you foresee? What where do you see the market going? You've seen it here and you've seen it massive. Do you think people still build 200,000 square foot buildings? Do you think, what do you think is the number when it comes to craft? Is it 100 lights? Is it 400 lights? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, the industry, those are two questions. So the first part is the industry. I think we're in an industry Great Depression is a great way of putting it. We overpromised, we underperformed as an entire market industry in the whole country. I think that so many places have legalized that it's allowed the black market to come back without fear. Because when we first legalized, it wiped the black market out, because it was like, why would anyone go meet some dude at the mall that was there like a third of the times he said he was going to be there, and, you know, get the Tuesday, Thursday call where it's like, it'll be here on Tuesday, it'll be here on Thursday. Like that eliminated the black market, the inconsistency of availability for the business versus being able to just go into a store and buy weed. People were like, I don't even care if it's not as good. It's just the convenience and the ease of it.
Yeah.
But then now we've got so many places that are even legal/illegal, like in Oklahoma, where they're growing legal weed, can't sell it and selling it illegally. That's flooding the world with, or the US, with illegal cannabis. And the police don't give a shit about it anymore. It's not like it used to be. So the paranoia level is so low that we have this huge influx of black market right now. We have a total collapse of the MSOs and the footprint people. And I mean, we're just seeing just the beginning of it, and we're about to see a major fallout in the next probably 6 months to a year, especially with no federal aid and 280E being against, you know, still being against us, and banking being against us. Those are the two things that could like free us, or federal legalization. But
none of that's going to happen.
Yeah, not for a long time. And so I really see it going back to like, think of craft beer, and think of how like there was a time when, you know, it's still right now, like if you go to certain places in America, they're pounding Bud Lights and Coors Lights and Miller Lights or whatever. And there's like a small percentage that pays a higher price point to go drink the cool, fun stuff at the cool little liquor stores. I think that's where the industry's headed. Is like, if you're, a national brand of high end quality is almost unattainable, in my opinion. There's going to be some diminishing return when you start to spread it over so many states, and especially when there's no federal legalization, because it's not as simple as just like running the same operation in 7 different places. You're running 7 different operations and 7 different sets of rules and all those other things. And so I really see like, again, small scale, high end, and you can grow, and you can get to 100,000 square feet, but only if you master 10 to 20,000 square feet at a time. And only if you have a culture inside your business, and only if the employees are bought in. Again, your human capital, you can master the environment, and then you can maintain good genetics. Like,
and you guys do a pretty good job, I know, at Culto with a decent amount of square footage, you know, I mean,
yeah, it's definitely, but we also have our in-house lab. And so everything like outdoor that's sellable is, you know, like the highest end tops get harvested first. And then everything else we just have the option always of like, well, we'll just use it for extract. And so I always tell people, like, if you want to grow super high end cannabis and you want to get bigger than, 20,000 square feet of flowering canopy, if you don't have an extraction license, you're putting yourself into a pretty tough position.
Mm-hmm. No, you're not wrong there. And you working with those guys, you built out an amazing lab at that facility. You guys are doing rosin, you're doing live resin, you're doing, do they even have tissue culture there? I think.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, you guys, I know because you guys actually hired some of the guys that used to work for me at Grassroots, in which I gave them gleaming, some of the brightest minds out there. So I was happy to see them go to Culta, because I was like, oh, this is a place where these guys can actually thrive. It is a unique cultivation for the state of Maryland, and
the whole country, and especially the East Coast.
And not for nothing, shout out to you and those guys, because you really were one of the first outdoor cultivations on the East Coast in that scale ever.
Yeah.
Which I remember that year and watching those guys. I remember watching them, close in on the weather at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And, harvest time is always around my birthday in mid-October. And I remember watching Jay, being like, there's a store moving in at the end of the week. We got to get it all down.
Yeah,
and realistically, only a third of what they have there now was there,
yeah.
and it was pretty amazing to see. So, you're definitely, you definitely fit into that pioneer model that we talked about at the beginning of the show, where, you've really helped kind of pave the way, not only in Colorado, but in a lot of places around the entire country, which is pretty amazing, especially considering, everybody talks about all these other, Burner and all the rest of these people. And like, you're way under the radar as far as any of that goes. You've never really been like, hey, I do all these things. You just kind of, fly under the radar and make it happen, and again, with a very, very small but badass team. You know,
Thanks,
so
man.
shout out to you guys. You know, last but not least, you know, any tips for anybody who does consult or wants to kind of get into what you do? I mean,
And also, because I was just thinking as we're going through this, like, this is a pretty goddamn inspirational story, right? Started from a door guy in a Denver hippie bar. Like, for people that are going, like, we have home growers and people hate this commercial stuff. You can be the change that you want to see. Just like you started there. If you're the guy who knows how to do this stuff and you have a good attitude and you're a go-getter and willing to put through all the crap in there, I think a lot of people, especially because we get a lot of UK viewership and everything where legalization hasn't rolled out. I think you're going to be a big inspiration. Get in the game. You can be the change.
Absolutely. Just go for it. And, you know, to your question, Gabe, like, the number one thing that we did right, and we did it before we had to do it right, is we stayed brand agnostic. We don't like Fluence. I would love to know the dollar amount of Fluence lights that my company sold for Fluence. We've never taken $1 from Fluence, because what happens when somebody comes out with a better light and then we're stuck selling shit to people that isn't the best? And so we've stayed brand agnostic. We've stayed true blue, which I know, you know, the old saying,
very much so.
I brought my old school hippie mentality from the Grateful Dead bars, from working the door, from being nice to people and doing fair business, all the way into this massive industry where I was watching people gouge people's eyes out and take huge chunks of equity in businesses and charge insane amounts of money, and then turn around and charge them for
20% interest on a year's worth of money,
for the genetics, and turn around and just basically doing a cash grab. And I was like, you know, there was a few like dumb things that stood out in my mind. The movie American Gangster, Denzel Washington,
great movie, dude.
But his business philosophy was best product at the lowest price. And I was like, man, if I undercut everyone in price and I'm the best, like, that's going to keep me around for a really long time. And then I had this, it's a dumb story, but I'll tell as fast as I can. I used to go down to Mexico as a kid, and I was afraid to learn how to haggle. And so I learned how to haggle in Mexico over things I wasn't even intending to buy. I didn't even have money, but like, they'd be like, $12 for this pinata. I'd be like, I'll give you 6. And he's like, screw you, 20. And I'm like, 8. And like, but not even buying it, but just getting comfortable with haggling. I got to the point where I got really good at it. And I was once at a gun show in like my 20s, and I wanted to buy this pistol, and I was like, I'm going to employ the Tijuana tactics. And so I started beating the shit out of the guy, and like with numbers, and he's just like, oh, and like all day long I beat him down. And at the end of the day, I walk up to him and he's like, here, just fucking take it. Like, I'll take your price. Like, and the defeat on his face did not make me feel good. It made me feel horrible. And I was like, oh man, I'm so sorry. Like, and I had this aha moment where it's like, it isn't about getting yours and fuck everybody. This is about, I want fuck yeah deals for both sides. I want to walk away from a deal going,
feeling like we all won.
I gave him a really good deal, and he gave me, and we all won. And I only do business that way ever since. And there was a time when it cost me a lot of money. Like, I could be retired right now from the money that we could have made the first 5 years, when I was just like, I could have made up a number. Give me $700,000 a year. They'd be like, sure. Like, they were funded, they were eager, and the business plans showed in these crazy, the $4,800 pound scenarios that like things were going to, they were going to,
it's always going to be this much money.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and instead I stayed fair and honest, and that has gotten me, and do this in every industry, in any industry. I thought it was just like old weed dealer, like, you know, like, you don't rat on anybody, you don't rip people off. Like, and I just kept that mentality, and like, it works really, really good now in big business. And so be honest and be fair, and come in and work for free. Do free work and make it to where you know, like I always talk about, at every month, every business has an accounting meeting, and they look at their P&L, they look at their highest expenses, and they look at how much money they're making. And as soon as they're not making any money, the first thing they're going to chop off is their highest expenses. Don't be the head sticking up the highest. Don't be the guy, you know, there's consultants that charge $30,000 a month to go in and work inside these facilities. And if you're $5,000 to $7,000 to $10,000 a month, maybe you don't stick your head out so high, and they keep you around longer. And because a lot of the times when you're asking that much money, you have to make miracles happen that can't happen and fast enough. And again, if the culture sucks in the place, you're not going to be able to make a difference anyway.
Yeah. If you're getting paid Lewis Hamilton money, you better win first place every time.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And a lot of times it's taken out of your hands, your ability to do it. And so come in cheap, start working for free, be fair, be over fair, and then ask for yours when you've earned it. And be careful of equity. I've taken equity in one place, Culta, and when everyone was out grabbing all this equity, they lost out on so much money they could have saved and put into their own businesses. And now everybody owns a bunch of hopes and dreams. They own 20% of air.
Dude, my Curaleaf stock is $1.
Yeah.
They gave it to me in the 6s, so it's like yikes.
I know, man. And
so
that's how it is all around.
Definitely, that's been a lesson for a lot of folks for sure. Well, dude, I mean, awesome conversation today. Super awesome conversation. It's been really good having you in studio. Any parting words for any of our listeners, and where can people find you?
Yeah. So for the listeners, man, thank you. If you're listening to this podcast, you're a part of the culture. You're a part of the real movement, which is the thing that the reason I ended up with this career and job and this crazy ass story is all because I love this plant so much and the flowers of it so much. And I think it's the most beautiful plant on earth. And like, just for the people that are doing that, we're the reason that it will survive. And like, also for the people listening that are like struggling in cannabis right now, people aren't going to stop smoking weed. This isn't going anywhere. We're upside down.
Point. Really good point.
We're upside down. We're over leveraged. We're over invested. We're underperforming. But there will come a time when the supply doesn't outreach the demand anymore. And then the suppliers will be the best suppliers and the demand will be what it is. And we'll slowly grow the industry. It's not going anywhere. People are getting their asses kicked right now. And it's definitely time to get lean into but also stay sharp and don't take the victim role. I think that's another thing is like the OGs of this industry. A lot of my friends like feel like we're victims now. We blah, blah. And it's like, hey, we've had our chances and now we got to play by the rules just like everybody else. And the industry's getting its ass kicked. And so, stay nimble because it's not over yet.
Yep. Where can people find you?
My website is bickelco.com, BICKEL, like nickel, bickelco.com. And, that has all our contact information. It's actually, the thing I'm the most proud of in my whole life is literally my story of how this all happened and the body of work that we've done. And they're both on that website. So you can see our entire CV, our entire resume, every project we've ever done. And also a bunch of stuff. I shot some videos on the culture and popular culture versus counterculture and cannabis culture versus drug culture. And those are very educational for people that are just trying to understand what this whole thing is about. I think a lot of people think of cannabis smokers as like a drug user. And it's like, we've created an entire culture out of drug culture that's separate, that's professional adults that like to use cannabis instead of horrible things like pharmaceuticals and alcohol. So,
and it's funny because this went long, which is good. It makes me happy, but I definitely want to have you back on because, you used to be 500 pounds.
Yes, sir.
And now you're under 3. And, you call yourself the 300-pound cheetah, but,
yes, sir.
I've worked out with you. I've seen you do things that are absolutely miraculous. And, I don't want to cut that short. I want to be able to give you the time to really tell that story because dude, you used cannabis to lose weight, which
performance enhancement drug,
which a lot of people, I mean, when I tell that story to people, they look at me and they're like, what? And I'm like, just pull up the picture, bro. I'm like, you see, and when I first met you, that was you. Yep. The picture on the left, that was Matt. That's the Matt Bickle I met 20 plus years ago. Like I said, he was the door at the bar. There wasn't anybody at Sancho's or Quixote. And understand that bar was on Colfax. Colfax was still not as nice as it is nowadays. And, Bickle was rough and tough and you didn't fuck with him because he'd flatten you, And so seeing, and congratulations to losing all the weight. Congratulations to putting all the work in. You have, I watch you on a daily basis. People know my journey as far as, trying to be in shape, and you and Eugene are probably two of the biggest inspirations. But what you've done is amazing. So I definitely want to have you back on. I definitely want to discuss that fitness journey because I think that could definitely resonate with a lot of folks who watch the show.
That resonates with me. I'll tell you, anyone that follows my progress, post surgery, I've not been healthy. And also another thing, this was very inspiring. I want to hear stories in 5 years that someone out there listened to this interview, got inspired, got with their local cannabis world, business, however they get in there, and it changed their life because this is grassroots. This is amazing. I love this. I don't get inspired easily, Bickle. As
you like to say, from the basement to the boardroom.
Yeah, basement to the boardroom.
Fuck, hell yeah, dude.
And that's real talk, And I mean, again, you see a lot of people on a lot of other podcasts that are out here telling their stories. And one of the things I've always loved about you is you've been super low key for such a long time, and you've really just taken shots from afar and made more kills than anyone. So God bless you, dude. I really appreciate you coming in today. Well, from the Jug Den, we appreciate you, the listener, as always, and enjoy your day. Stay well. Peace.